At 7:10 p.m. on November 10th, 1975, the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald spoke to another ship moving through the darkness of Lake Superior. His freighter was carrying more than 26,000 tons of iron ore. The waves were growing higher. The ship was listing. Some equipment had been damaged, and the storm was becoming worse by the minute. But when the other captain asked how they were doing, the answer did not sound like a final warning. It sounded almost calm. "We are holding our own." 10 minutes later, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared from radar. There was no distress call. No lifeboat was seen. No survivor was ever found. For decades, investigators have tried to explain how a ship nearly 3 football fields long could vanish so quickly. The wreck was eventually found in 2 pieces on the bottom of the lake, but even the wreck could not answer the most important question: what happened during those final 10 minutes? The Edmund Fitzgerald was not a small fishing boat caught in an unexpected storm. She was one of the largest and most powerful freighters on the Great Lakes. Launched in 1958, the ship was built to carry iron ore from the mines around Lake Superior to the steel mills farther east. She was 729 feet long, heavy, experienced, and familiar with the route. Her captain, Ernest McSorley, had spent decades sailing the Great Lakes. The crew knew the ship. They knew the lake. They knew that November storms could be dangerous. This was not a voyage into an unknown ocean with an untested crew. That is what makes the disappearance so unsettling. The people on board were not unaware of the danger. They were professionals doing a journey they had completed many times before. On November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, carrying a full cargo of taconite iron ore. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was traveling in the same general direction. The 2 ships were not tied together or sailing as one convoy, but they remained close enough to communicate. This detail would become crucial because the Anderson became the last ship to hear the Fitzgerald alive. At first, the voyage seemed normal. The weather forecast, however, was becoming more serious. A powerful storm was moving across Lake Superior, and the ships would soon have to cross open water with little protection from the wind. Lake Superior is often described as a lake, but that word can make it sound safer than it is. It is so large that the opposite shoreline can disappear beyond the horizon. Its water is cold, its weather can change quickly, and powerful winds can build waves that behave more like ocean waves than ordinary lake water. In November, the danger becomes greater. A crew can be dealing with freezing spray, poor visibility, violent movement, and water cold enough to kill a person within minutes. The Edmund Fitzgerald was designed for rough conditions, but no ship is designed to ignore physics. A vessel can survive a storm for hours and still be destroyed by a sudden change in stability. During the day on November 10th, the storm intensified. The wind pushed the ships toward difficult conditions, and the crews adjusted their course as they tried to reduce the worst effects of the waves. The Fitzgerald moved toward the eastern part of the lake, where the route included areas of changing depth and underwater ridges. The ship was heavily loaded, and the cargo sat inside large holds protected by hatch covers. Those covers were meant to keep water out, but their safety depended on their condition, their seals, and the force of the waves striking the deck. At some point during the afternoon, the Edmund Fitzgerald reported trouble. The details are not perfectly clear because there was no complete recording of the final conversation and no surviving member of the crew to explain what happened. The ship had taken water over the deck, some equipment was damaged. The vessel was developing a list, meaning it was leaning to one side. A list is not automatically a disaster. Ships can continue moving while leaning. But a list becomes dangerous when it is combined with flooding, heavy cargo, damaged equipment, and waves that keep returning before the crew has time to correct the problem. The Arthur M. Anderson was close enough to monitor the situation. Around 6:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald communicated that she was taking on water and had a bad list. The ship's radar was also not working properly, which meant the crew had less information about the exact position of hazards and the movement of the waves around them. The captain of the Anderson asked whether the Fitzgerald needed assistance. The response suggested that the crew was still managing the situation. They were not reporting that the ship was sinking. They were still trying to reach safety. This is where the final mystery begins. A ship can be in serious danger without sounding desperate on the radio. Experienced crews often speak calmly because they are still working through the problem. They may believe they have time. They may be trying to avoid panic. They may not yet know that the situation has passed the point of recovery. At 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley gave his final known report to the Arthur M. Anderson. The exact words became famous. "We are holding our own." Those words have been interpreted in different ways. To some people, they sound reassuring. To others, they sound like the last controlled statement from a crew that was already losing the battle. The Anderson's crew could see the Fitzgerald's lights through the storm, but visibility was poor. Snow and spray moved across the lake, and darkness had settled over the water. The distance between the two ships made it impossible to see every movement clearly. Then, sometime after that final conversation, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar. At first, the crew could not be certain what had happened. The ship might have dropped below the radar beam. It might have been hidden by waves. It might have lost power. But the Fitzgerald did not reappear. The Anderson's captain contacted the Coast Guard. Search aircraft and vessels were sent toward the last known position. The rescuers were looking for anything that could confirm the ship's location. Lights, lifeboats, smoke, floating equipment, or people in the water. But the storm had erased the surface trail. The searchers found debris and an empty life ring, but no survivors. There had been no final distress call and no time for a clear abandonment signal. The ship had not slowly drifted into trouble where another crew could watch it sink. It had vanished in a short period of time. By the following day, the search had changed from rescue to recovery. The Edmund Fitzgerald had gone down in eastern Lake Superior with all 29 crew members on board. The first question was not only why the ship sank, but how it could sink so quickly that no lifeboat was launched. If a vessel is taking water slowly, its crew normally has time to send more messages, prepare survival equipment, and abandon ship. The absence of those actions suggested that the final event may have happened with extraordinary speed. The wreck was discovered on November 14th, only days after the sinking. It rested in roughly 530 feet of water, far below the surface. The ship had separated into two major sections, with the bow and stern lying apart on the lake floor. The wreck proved that the Edmund Fitzgerald had not simply disappeared into an unknown underwater canyon. It also showed that the final forces acting on the ship had been severe. But the wreck could not preserve the exact order of events. It could not tell investigators whether flooding came first, whether the hull broke apart before reaching the bottom, or what the crew experienced during the final seconds. The official investigation examined several possible explanations. One possibility involved the ship's route over underwater shoals. The Fitzgerald may have passed through an area where the lake bottom rose closer to the hull than expected. If the ship struck or scraped the bottom, the impact could have damaged the hull or allowed water to enter the cargo holds. Another possibility involved the hatch covers. If waves forced water through ineffective closures, the cargo holds could have flooded rapidly. Once enough water entered, the ship would lose buoyancy and become increasingly difficult to control. The cargo itself was also important. Taconite pellets are dense iron ore material, and the Fitzgerald was carrying an enormous weight of it. If water entered the holds, the conditions inside the cargo area could change quickly. The cargo might become heavier, or the ship could lose the stable balance it needed to remain upright. A small list could become a dangerous angle. As the ship leaned, more water could enter. That could create a chain reaction. Flooding would reduce stability. Reduced stability would expose more of the deck to waves, and further waves would force in even more water. There was also the possibility of structural failure. The Edmund Fitzgerald was a very long vessel, and a long hull experiences enormous forces when it rides across large waves. The bow and stern can be supported by separate waves, while the middle of the hull drops into a trough. That movement places stress along the ship's structure. If flooding had already weakened the vessel, the pressure from the storm could have caused it to bend, break, or plunge beneath the surface. But no theory can be proven with complete certainty because the final moments were not recorded. The Coast Guard's most probable explanation focused on loss of buoyancy caused by massive flooding of the cargo hold, most likely through ineffective hatch closures. The investigation also considered the possibility that the ship had encountered a wave pattern or underwater obstruction that allowed water to enter faster than the crew could control it. This explanation does not require a single impossible wave or a supernatural event. It describes a chain of ordinary maritime dangers becoming fatal at the same time. A heavy cargo, a long hull, severe weather, damaged equipment, a developing list, and water entering where it should not. But the official conclusion did not erase every uncertainty. The NTSB also studied the disaster, and later researchers continued to debate the details. Some believe the ship may have struck the lake bottom. Others believe the hatch covers and flooding provide the strongest explanation. Some focus on structural failure. Others believe several factors worked together. The argument continues because the wreck cannot reveal the exact final sequence, and because there was no surviving witness from the bridge. The most haunting part of the story is that the crew was still communicating only minutes before the disappearance. The final radio message was not a dramatic scream. It was a short statement from a captain who appeared to believe the ship could continue. The words did not mean the Edmund Fitzgerald was safe. They meant that, at that moment, the crew was still fighting to keep control. The ship was already in trouble, but trouble at sea can exist on a sliding scale. A crew may be damaged, exhausted, and frightened while still believing that the next few minutes will bring them through. For the people on the Arthur M. Anderson, the shock must have been impossible to understand. One moment, another freighter was nearby, exchanging radio messages in the storm. Then the signal stopped. The lights were gone. The radar contact disappeared. The lake looked almost empty. There was no visible sinking, no clear impact, and no final explanation waiting on the surface. The disaster changed how safety was discussed on the Great Lakes. Investigators examined hatch covers, inspections, stability, emergency equipment, weather decisions, and the dangers of assuming that a large ship could survive conditions simply because it had survived them before. The sinking showed that size is not the same as invulnerability. A massive vessel can still be defeated when several small weaknesses line up at the wrong moment. The Edmund Fitzgerald did not vanish without leaving evidence. It left radio messages, a last known position, floating debris, an underwater wreck, an investigation, and the memories of the men who heard its final signal. But evidence does not always create a perfect answer. Sometimes it only narrows the possibilities. We know the storm was severe. We know the ship was taking water and listing. We know the crew was still communicating at 7:10 p.m. We know the ship disappeared from radar shortly afterward. We know the wreck was found in 2 major sections. And we know that all 29 crew members were lost. What we do not know is the exact moment the situation became irreversible. Did water enter through damaged hatch closures? Did the ship strike the lake bottom? Did the cargo affect its stability? Did the hull break apart in the storm? Or did all of these problems combine within minutes, leaving the crew with no time to respond? The strongest answer is not one dramatic cause. It is a chain of failures. The storm created the danger. The heavy cargo made stability more important. The list showed that something was already wrong. The flooding may have removed the ship's remaining buoyancy. The long hull and massive waves may have finished what the water had started. By the time the final signal was sent, the crew may have believed they were still holding their own. They may not have known that the lake had already taken away their last chance. At 7:10 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald was still a working ship moving through a storm. 10 minutes later, it was gone. The wreck remains below the cold water of Lake Superior, protected as the final resting place of 29 men. Its radio signal ended, but the questions did not. If the final disaster began with flooding, was the decisive mistake made before the ship entered the storm, when the hatch covers were inspected, when the route was chosen, or when the crew decided that the vessel could continue? The Edmund Fitzgerald is remembered as a ship that sank in a storm. But the deeper mystery is how quickly confidence became silence. A professional crew was still communicating. A powerful vessel was still moving. The captain still believed they were holding their own. Then the signal stopped, and Lake Superior closed over the last known moments of everyone on board. So, what do you think was the true turning point? The storm, the flooding, the cargo, the ship's structure, or the decision to keep moving through dangerous water? Because the final signal gave the world one last sentence, but it never gave us the ending.